Hello, everyone, and welcome to iCritic Live. This is the podcast where we talk about entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. I am your host, Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time with me here today. You know what I want to talk about today? I want to talk about Roger Rabbit. Now, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of my favorite movies of all time, directed by the brilliant Robert Zemeckis, and still a revolutionary film in many ways when it comes to the combination of animation and live action. And it's just still a really funny movie. I mean, you see other hybrid movies that have come and gone that don't have the staying power as Roger Rabbit. And it's a really special film. But as you look at this Wikipedia page, you may see something based on Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Now, what is Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Well, Who Censored Roger Rabbit is actually a novel that was written. It's billed as a mystery, but it's also part comedy and, pulp and satire and things like that, which not a lot of people are familiar with, which means the Roger Rabbit movie is an adaptation of a book. So since Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg did not, create Roger Rabbit, the question is, who created Roger Rabbit? Well, that would be a man by the name of Gary K. Wolfe, who is a successful author. And I actually have him here today to talk about not only Roger Rabbit, but his work in general. Welcome, Gary.
Hey, thank you. And I got to be honest with you, after that sterling introduction that you just had there, I think I should be wearing a tuxedo and walking down a red carpet with a scantily clad actress on my arm. That was quite the 20th Century Fox intro. I love that.
Oh, thank you. You do enough episodes of this, and you kind of it never gets less nervous to do it every time. But
I'm sure another opening, another show.
another opening, another show. So anyway, Gary, you created Roger Rabbit, and because you created Roger Rabbit, I want to open with discussing not Roger Rabbit to begin with, because you've actually written other things. We'll get to Roger Rabbit in a second. You actually got your start writing this novel called Killer Bowl, which I read roughly 7 or 8 years ago, primarily because I was a Roger Rabbit fan. And this was just a fun book about a street football and how barbaric sports could potentially become. Ironically, sports haven't become much more barbaric since you wrote this book, except for the fact that we know what concussions are now. But I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about your first novel, Killer Bowl, how it came to be, how you were able to sell it to publishers. Because I remember reading you had a hard time selling Roger Rabbit, but I can imagine something like Killer Bowl being equally difficult to sell. So why don't you tell me a little bit about this book?
Sure. I was a writer. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I started writing short stories. I had written, I don't know, maybe 50, 100 short stories. And in those days, there were a lot of places that would publish short stories, up to and including major magazines like Esquire and Playboy, Big Deal Store, Big Deal magazines, plus the science fiction magazines were taking a lot of short stories. And I was writing them. I was doing very well, selling them all. Never had a reject. And I began to realize that if I wrote one novel instead of 12 short stories, that I would probably get a lot more money. So, and maybe a little more prestige. So instead of writing short stories, I switched to writing novels, and I wrote Killer Bowl. It took me about 2 years, and it was really a project from my heart. I'm a big football fan. I'm a big sports fan in general, and I wanted to project what I thought would happen to sports in the future. I wrote this book in 1976, and I wanted to project what would happen to sports in the future if they kept going along the lines that I saw, becoming faster, with bigger players, with more violence, with more blood-curdling, bloodthirsty things to appeal to an audience that wanted that sort of thing. And so I said it actually in 2010, 2011, writing it in 1976. And a lot of the things I predicted in Killer Bull actually came true. I predicted mixed martial arts, sports, hand-to-hand combat. I predicted the internet, the cell phone, the gasoline crisis, a whole bunch of stuff that actually came true. And it's episodic, features a whole cast of characters. I have in the back, I have the roster of the two teams that play in Killer Bowl 21, which is the ultimate game in the book. And I used the names of all my friends in San Francisco as players. So if you read through, you will get kind of a telephone listing of who my friends were in San Francisco at the time. I sent it to my agent, finished it, sent it to my agent. He sent it to Doubleday, and Doubleday bought it immediately. And not only did Doubleday buy it immediately, but Doubleday gave me a contract for 3 more books. Sight unseen. They said, we love Killer Bull, so write us 3 more books, whatever they are, we'll publish them. Not a problem. So that was kind of the story of Killer Bull. It was not a hard sell. In fact, it was ridiculously easy, and kind of kicked off my career as a novelist. The second book in that series for Doubleday was A Generation Removed. The third book was called The Resurrectionist. And then came the fourth book, in which I wanted to do something completely outside the box. I was happy writing science fiction, and I was pretty well known as a science fiction author. But I wanted to do more than that. So I decided I wanted to do something that incorporated the loves of my youth, which were comic books, cartoon strips, and cartoons, and noir novels. So I came up with a premise for that, and that was the hardest premise I ever came up with in my life, because not easy concepts to interrelate. I mean, how do you relate cartoons to noir mysteries? But I was watching Saturday morning cartoons one Saturday morning, and I became fascinated not by the cartoons, which were pretty simplistic compared to the cartoons of my youth, but I became fascinated by the commercials, in which I saw cartoon characters, the Trix Rabbit, Captain Crunch, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, Tony the Tiger, cartoon characters talking to real kids, and nobody seemed to think that was odd. And I thought to myself, what a great idea for a novel. What if you had a world where cartoon characters were real? So I spent a year just researching the conventions of cartoons and comic strips to see what would be really funny if you had a cartoon character living in a real world. And I came up with all kinds of stuff. Like in my book, the characters, Roger, Jessica, all the cartoon characters, aren't the stars of cartoons in the movies. They're the stars of comic books and comic strips. So instead of talking in words like we're talking now, they talk in word balloons, which floats up over their head. And instead of talking, you read them. And if they turn around, well, so does their balloon. So you got to either learn to read in reverse or go run around and stand in front of them again. And they can do things with their balloons. Like they can put up a balloon with the weight of a lead weight and bop you over the head with it. Or if somebody fires a toon gun, a bang balloon goes up. And bang balloons are very brittle. They get caught. They fall down. They land on the floor. They break into a million pieces like a Delft plate. But if you collect all those pieces and glue them back together again, which a forensics lab can do, You've got a bang balloon. And if you then find the gun that you think committed the crime, you produce another bang balloon. And if the two match up, that was the gun. When a toon plays the piano, the notes go trickling off into the air and in strings, and people will collect those strings of notes and cut them up into 8x12 sheets, and that's where sheet music comes from. So, I had a lot of stuff going on that I thought was really pretty funny.
And what's also cool is that, kind of like the movie, but a little different, you had cameos from like Dick Tracy and Popeye and Snoopy, which I'll ask a question about that later. But but as someone who actually loves syndicated comics, like I still have many of the comics in the book forms. I unfortunately think newspaper strips are kind of a dying art, unfortunately. So
you're right. I used a lot of comic strip and comic book characters from my era as characters in my book, which you can do legally as long as you don't as long as you don't disparage them, make them a pedophile or make them the murderer and do horrible things to them. As long as you just represent them accurately, you can use them in a novel. You can't show them, but you could use them. And so I did this book, clearly the best book I'd ever written in my life, clearly the best book I thought I would ever write. And my agent sent it to my publisher as the fourth book in my 4-book deal. And first time in my career, they rejected it. I got a reject. So I called my editor and I said, Sharon, why did you reject this book? This is clearly the best thing I've ever written. She said, oh, I agree. She said, that was hilarious. It was just totally unique, but it was so different from anything you've ever written. I mean, so different from anything anybody's ever written that I had to send it to the marketing department and get them to sign off on it.
Oh, no.
And it was them who rejected it. So I called the marketing department. Head of the marketing department. I said, Chuck, why did you reject my novel? And he said, oh, Gary, he said, we love this novel. All of us here in marketing love this novel. But there's no category for it on the bookstore shelves. It's not a regular adult novel. It's not a mystery. It's not a fantasy. It's not a children's book. There's no category for it. I can't sell this book. So I went back to my agent. I said, Bill, if I can't get this book published, I don't want to be a writer anymore because I love doing this book and this is what I want to do. And he said, well, don't worry about it. A wonderful book. We'll get it published. We'll find a home for it. So he started sending it out to different publishers, sometimes different editors of the same publisher. And along the way, it got 110 rejects. It was rejected 110 times, always for the same reason. We can't sell this book. There's no category for it on the bookstore shelves.
So you were actually keeping track how many times you were getting rejected. Did you have like a binder or something with all the reject letters?
I did. Yeah, I used to, in those days, I don't get many rejects, but in those days you got them by mail. And I'm guessing now they probably come by email, but in those days they came by mail. And my wife used to call my trip out to the mailbox every evening the daily disappointments, because I would go out to the mailbox and come back with a fistful of rejects on Who Censored Roger Rabbit. And 110 rejects later, the 111th submission went to St. Martin's Press, and it landed on the desk of a woman named Rebecca Martin, who had just published a major bestseller for them. And the president of the company gave her a vanity project. He said, look, you published this, you edited this big bestseller for us, you discovered it, you edited it, you can publish whatever you want for your next book, carte blanche. And just then Roger Rabbit came across her desk. So she took Roger Rabbit, read it, loved it, and took it up to the president of the company, put it on his desk and said, here's the book I want to publish. So he said, okay, I'm going to take this book. I'm going to take it home tonight. I'm going to read it. I'll get back to you in the morning. So he took it home, read it, came back to her, called her in his office the next morning, said, Rebecca, I read this book, and I told you could publish any book you wanted, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it. There's no category for this on a bookstore shelf. And Rebecca stepped up to the plate and said, look, you told me I could publish any book I wanted. either publish this book or I quit. And so they published the book. Yeah, and very small quantities. It was less than 5,000 copies, which is next to nothing. And people ask me, they say, "Hey, if you had a time machine and you could go back in time and change one thing, what would you do?" And what I would do is I would go back to 1981 when that book came out, 5,000 copies, and I would buy them all. And I would put them in a barn somewhere, and I would haul them out today because it came out in 1981, priced at $2.98 a copy. Today, if you could find one on eBay, it's north of $500. So I would have bought them all then, brought them forward, sell them today, and I'd be living in a castle in Spain. So basically, they published the book. Yeah.
Some technical difficulties. Sorry, folks, we're having some technical difficulties right now. Hopefully we can have Gary back. Okay, you're back. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties there.
Oh, am I gone? What did you miss?
That you would be living in a high castle if you had bought those books.
Well, yep, that is correct.
Well, that's hindsight in 2020 for a lot of things. There's certain video games that, had I realized what they'd be worth now, I never would have opened them. Of course, then I wouldn't have been enjoying the games.
Or your Star Wars toys, or
those Star Wars
Roger Rabbit LBJ figures. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what becomes valuable these days. So, all right. So anyway, the first edition comes out. It's like 5,000 copies. Clearly, it must have sold enough for there to be like a second and third printing at some point.
Yes and no. What happened was I sold a book in 1980, and it actually came out in 1981. In late 1980, now remember, this is before the book actually came out. The book wasn't coming out for another 6 months. I got a call at home, my home phone. A guy on the other end says, "Hi, is this Gary K. Wolf?" I said, "Yes, it is." He says, "Hi, this is Roy Disney from the Disney Company." And "Yeah, right, Roy Disney called me at home. That's rich. Who is this really?" He said, No, it's really Roy Disney." He said, "I read your book, and I wondered if you would be interested in letting Disney make a movie of this book." "Yeah, right. A book hasn't even come out yet." But it turned out that what had happened was somebody at St. Martin's Press, and I tried, but I could never discover who did it because I wanted to kiss her or him full on the lips. Somebody at St. Martin's Press sent a copy of the manuscript to Disney and said, "Hey, we're going to publish this book next year. We think you'd really like it. We think it'd make a great Disney movie." Disney read it and Disney agreed. So they came to me and said, we want this. We want this book. And there was a lot of reasons why they wanted Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Disney in 1980 was becoming a second-rate movie production studio. They were making movies that were the second half of double features, and they could see that there soon were going to be no double features, so they were going to be out of business. They were making movies like Flubber and the Nutty Professor and Herbie and the Black Hole and the Black Cauldron, which disappeared down the black hole. They were not making great movies. They had been offered Star Wars and they passed. They'd been offered E.T. and they passed. They had to do something to reinvigorate the company, and they saw Who Censored Roger Rabbit as that kind of a project, a live action animation movie to the nth level that would really set them back up amongst the major film studios in Hollywood. And plus, they offered me more money for the rights than I'd made on everything I'd written put together. So, who am I to say no? But I really, you've heard the description, the way I described that book. I really didn't think this was a filmable book. I didn't think there was any way they could take my book and film it and remain true to my vision.
Well, the way
But
that Disney, with the way the contents even of the book, like, I mean, it should be noted, like people, like the Roger Rabbit movie is actually still pretty edgy for a Disney movie. It's pretty edgy for a PG rated film, but your book, that book, is definitely pretty heavy PG-13, light R material. Like if Disney, if you hate the way Jessica is in the movie, boy, don't read the book, because she's really scandalous in the book. So I'm sure somewhere in the back of your mind you had to be going like, well, how's this going to work without them making some major changes?
yeah, well, if you're a writer and you take money for one of your books and you say, okay, here, take this and make it into a movie, you have to trust that the people you're giving it to are going to do it right. And you have to be prepared for the almost inevitable fact that they're not, that it's going to come out, it's going to be a piece of crap, and it's going to trash your reputation, and you're going to be through as a writer. That's the sacrifice you make if you want to make your living writing novels. I took the money and I was prepared to suffer the consequences. Luckily, they did right by me, but in the beginning, it didn't look that way. They tried and tried and tried to produce it as a live action animated movie, and they had no success. They just couldn't get it so that the characters looked real. So finally, Roy came to me, and I was involved in this through the whole process, through the early days, through the later days, through the whole process. Roy came to me and said, we're not having much luck making this as a live action animated movie. So what would you think if we had the characters in costume like they are in Disneyland? And I thought, oh, Jesus, I'm going to have Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant. I'm going to have Haley Mills as Jessica. Dean Jones as the rabbit. I said,
I mean, the cast aside, that seems to be missing the whole point of the book.
Absolutely. And I pointed that out to Roy. I said, that misses the whole point of the premise. Cartoon characters living in a real world. And, he agreed. Yeah. So they went off and kept trying it. I don't know if they ever would have succeeded. Admittedly, they had some hurdles to overcome. First of all, they were working from 1980 to 1985 with 80 to 85 technology. And the technology that Steve Spielberg eventually used to produce this movie did not exist in 80 to 85. In fact, they invented technology for this movie that they used to great effect. And they actually invented technology that they used in other movies before Roger Rabbit came out, because Roger took from 85 to 88 to produce. And, so the technology didn't exist. Plus, Disney really did not have the clout in the industry to make this happen. One example, when in mid 1981, 82, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers, and Roy Disney said, hey, we're doing this live action animated movie, and we'd like to have Bugs Bunny appear in the movie. And Bugs would come on screen, would say, hey, what's up, Doc, would chomp on a carrot and walk off. What do you think of that? And Warner Brothers looked at Roy Disney and said, get lost. There's no way that Bugs Bunny is ever going to appear in a Walt Disney movie. That's just never going to happen. Never. Forget it. Never going to happen. So in 1985, early 86, Steve Spielberg goes to Warner Brothers, makes the identical request. Hey, we're doing a live action animated movie with cartoon characters and real people. Can I have Bugs Bunny for a cameo? And Warner Brothers says, of course, Steven, of course you can. And what about Porky Pig? Don't you want him too? And what about the Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote? How about Yosemite Sam? And geez, take them all. So Steven walks out with the entire stable of Warner Brothers characters, with only one codicil. I mean, Bugs Bunny was regarded as a cartoon superstar by Warner Brothers. He was a co-equal superstar with Mickey Mouse. So there was a contract, and Bugs Bunny had to be in every scene with Mickey Mouse. You could not have Mickey Mouse in a scene without Bugs. Plus, they had to have the same identical words of dialogue in the movie. So when you watch the movie, you can see they're in every scene together, and they have the same exact number of words of dialogue.
Except there's one scene in there. It's very brief. It's when Eddie's on the lot. You briefly see Bugs walking down the street without Mickey. So
it was okay. That was okay with Warner Brothers for Bugs to go walking by without Mickey, but Mickey could not be on screen without Bugs. And Warner Brothers made the animators crazy. They just made the animators crazy. So Warner Brothers insisted that they wanted the characters in the movie to be the 1985, 86 characters, which are remarkably different than the 1946 characters when the movie is set. They have totally different looks. The animators, of course, wanted to stay true to the premise and make them all 1946 characters. Warner Brothers insisted, no, the 85 characters. So the animators did two versions. They did one version with all of the Warner Brothers characters as the 85 characters, and another version with all the Warner Brothers characters as the 46 versions. They showed the 85 version to Warner Brothers and put the 46 version in the movie. And Warner Brothers didn't know this until they went to the premiere and saw the 1946 characters up on screen instead of the 85 characters. And they went ballistic. Lawsuits, they were going to file lawsuits. But the movie was such a phenomenal success and so reinvigorated the animation industry that they backed off, and Warner Brothers suddenly realized, hey, we can start making 1946 dolls and T-shirts and start selling that and have another little revenue stream here. Plus, this is good for the whole industry. So that dropped. I'll give you one other little insider peek at how the animators regarded Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was so tough for the animators to deal with that they wanted to have some visual indication of just what they thought about Warner Brothers. And there's something that animators do called gags in the margins. Film goes through a projector at 24 frames a second, and animators learned very early on that they could screw around with 6 of those frames, 6/24ths of a second, and put in little visual gags, and nobody could see because it was too fast for the human eye to see. So, they've been doing this since time immemorial. It's just going back to Gertie the dinosaur.
Going back to Betty Boop
Betty
specifically.
Boop. Every time Betty Boop says, boop, boop, be-doop, the front of her dress falls down and it picks back up again. Every single Betty Boop cartoon. Yep. So they wanted to do something in the movie to show how they felt about Warner Brothers. So when Bugs and Mickey are parachuting down next to Eddie Valiant, they wanted to have Mickey give Bugs the finger. Okay. Now, this was being animated at Dick Williams Animation Studio in London, and Dick had brought in animators from all over the world. It was like a little United Nations, millions of languages. He had brought in animators from Iron Curtain countries that had emigrated, and from South America, from all over, top-notch animators, but there was no common language. They didn't all speak English. So they gave this assignment to, I don't know, maybe a Yugoslavian guy. And in order to communicate with him, the English-speaking guy had to talk to the Spanish speaker, who had to talk to the Italian speaker, who had to talk to the Greek speaker, who had to talk to that Yugoslavian, all the way back. And so somewhere in the process, the concept got garbled. And if you look at that scene and you freeze frame it and look at it frame by frame, you will see that instead of Mickey giving Bugs the finger, it is Bugs giving Mickey the finger, which is entirely, the wrong message. So, but that was the animation process. Yeah.
And amazing how in Disney's frame by frame cleanup to remove some other little bit naughty bits that were snuck in by the animators, they didn't catch that.
The when you say Disney, it was not Disney corporate who would have gone through frame by frame and would have taken out all the naughty bits. The final check were done by Disney animators, and the little gags in the margins were funny. There was nothing X-rated, nothing even hard R. When the animators first got the idea about doing some gags in the margins for the movie, what they wanted to do was Betty Boop. They wanted to have Betty Boop, front of her dress fall down. When she says, "I still got it, ain't I, Eddie Boop Boopy Doop," front of her dress falls down, goes back up again. And so they called me in and they said, "Hey, we want to do this. We think it'd be funny. And it's just for us, nobody's ever going to see it." Because in those days, this was before video cassette, certainly before DVD. And I said, "That's way above my pay grade. I can't okay that." And so they said, "Well," I said, "you got to go to Steve." And they said, "Well, would you go to Steve? He likes you." All right. So I went to Steve Spielberg and said, "Hey, Steve, here's the animators would like to do this. There's precedent for it. Max Fleischer did it with all the Betty Boop cartoons. Nobody will ever see it. What do you think?" And he thought about it. He says, "Yeah, okay, go ahead. They can do it." So I went back. I says, "Okay, Betty Boop is in." So they called me in a couple days later and says, "Hey, can we do more?" So I went back to Steve and I said, "Well, they want to do more. And, they're working really hard. They're working long hours. It would be a nice gesture." He said, "Okay, they can do more, but nothing R-rated, nothing X-rated, PG-13 only." And so the whole movie is basically filled with them. And nobody, certainly it was checked, but the people who checked it were the animators, and they aren't going to take them out. And if Disney corporate had seen it, yeah, sure, Disney corporate would have taken it out. And nobody was aware of it until Steven finally decided he was never going to release this on video cassette, just like he was never going to release E.T. on video cassette. Then he finally did release E.T., made a ton of money, and said, "Well, maybe I'll do Roger Rabbit too." So they were going to release Roger Rabbit on video cassette. And Frank Marshall, the line producer, went on one of the late night talk shows and told the Betty Boop story. And immediately Disney freaked. Said, "Oh my God, they've got all these cassettes made, and they've all got a topless woman in them. And it's a family movie." So they destroyed all the cassettes, went back, took those 6 frames out, remastered it, and released the cassette. But they didn't take out any of the others, which is what would have happened had a Disney corporate person been checking the negatives, which they didn't. Nobody got wise until much later when it came out on DVD, and it became very easy to go through frame by frame, and people started going through it like a video game and identifying all of the gags and the margins. And of course, the one that caused the most consternation to Disney was the scene when Eddie and Jessica are coming out of Toontown, and they're coming out of the tunnel, and they hit that dip, and Benny the cab goes sliding and hits a telephone pole, and Jessica and Eddie go flying. And if you look at that frame by frame, you will see that first of all, Eddie's a dummy. He's not a real person. It's a dummy flying through the air. But Jessica does this beautiful somersault in the air where her dress billows out and her hair is billowed out underneath. And it's beautiful animation. But at the apex of her upside down cartwheel, her legs open up and she has no underwear. Well, it's not like she needs it. I mean, it's like looking at your Barbie doll, okay? But she had no underwear. And suddenly this became a sensation. But to show you how how relatively tasteful it was. USA Today printed the picture of Jessica upside down with no underwear on the front page in full color. So it was certainly not as
It's
uh,
not, it's not the
yeah,
scandal that people made it out to be.
I think. But of course, Disney freaked again, and Disney tried to justify this. You know, a bottomless woman now in a PG-13 movie. They said, well, we had this movie duped onto DVD in China, and a rogue Chinese animator painted out Jessica's panties. She had panties on her when we sent her over, but no panties when she came back. Well, that didn't fly. So then they said, well, it must have been some rogue animator here at Disney, and we're gonna track him down, and we're gonna blackball him from the animation industry, and he's never gonna work in the industry again.
Oh yeah, track down the guy from 25 years ago, or however long it had been.
Yeah, well, everybody knew who it was, but it was no secret among the animators who it was, and I'm not gonna out him here, but
right? No, don't.
he was at the time involved in a major way in another Disney animated movie that became a classic, and Disney knew who it was, and they weren't about to fire this guy. So that kind of scandal kind of passed, and it's still kind of fun. I actually have a list of all of the gags and the margins in the movie and in the 3 cartoons, of which there are 100, probably 500 total in all the projects. And every now and then on my Facebook page, I print them so that people can go through and have fun with their clickers and see all the good bits.
Yeah, well, and also what was kind of probably neat for you is that when they did release the special edition DVD, of course, they extended Jessica's skirt. When Baby Herman goes under that woman, they removed the finger that suggested he was pointing the finger up. But because they did that, almost every review mentioned it's ironic that a movie based on a book called Who Censored Roger Rabbit has in fact itself been censored.
Yeah.
So your book probably got more references in DVD reviews than it ever got in initial movie reviews.
Sure. And, now, wait, but one thing that you just said that I really wasn't aware of, I didn't realize that they made Jessica's shirt longer and skirt longer, and I didn't realize they took out Baby Herman's finger.
Yeah, well, the first re-release they did, they actually kept his arm completely on the side, but I guess it looked so goofy, so they put the arm back up in one of the later releases, but they lowered the finger.
so now I'm going to have to go through it frame by frame and see.
Yeah,
oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, and interestingly, people have found the Betty Boop gag still in the newer edition, so it's okay, well, so
they did take that one out, and the only way that I was able to actually see it, well, I saw it, of course, when they did it, but when they took that out, Bob Zemeckis has those 6 cells framed in his living room. So if you have dinner with Bob Zemeckis and go to his living room, you can see the 6 cells of Betty Boop topless.
I'd love to have dinner with Bob Zemeckis. Can you send me an invite? Tell him to invite me. I'd love to pick his brain about the Polar Express.
He's a vegetarian. He only eats carrots and spinach. So
I guess I could make a fruit yogurt or something. That's funny. So anyway, Roger Rabbit comes. So they finally make the movie. It's a huge hit. Gets several Oscar nominations. Couple of them not for picture, director, or screenplay, which I think that's not nonsense. I mean, it's it should have been in contention for all 3 of those awards. And then people start asking the question, when's there going to be a sequel? Where's the sequel? Now, folks, we're not here to talk about the movie sequel, which has long been caught up in complications and things like that. But technically, there are Roger Rabbit sequels you can buy right now in book form. This one is my favorite of the 3 who plugged Roger Rabbit. And I want to say two things about the Roger Rabbit series. One, it's kind of cool how all, I guess, four now of these books kind of live in their own little universes, because Who Censored Roger Rabbit doesn't necessarily lend itself to a sequel, and so you have to kind of explain how there is one at the beginning. This one's also my favorite of the book because it feels the most like the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my first question I have. This is also the only Roger Rabbit novel where the movie styles of the characters are on the cover, and all the rest of the books they're like either in the shadows or they're underground, or they're, as you can see with the audiobooks, they're shadowed. Does that mean Disney had involvement in this book? Was this like a co-production with Disney?
Yeah, Disney bought the rights to this for a sequel movie, and Disney. I was able to use Disney owns the likenesses of the character. I own the characters themselves, so I can write books about them, short stories, novels, whatever, articles. I can't show them unless I get Disney and Spielberg's permission. Now, for this book, Disney bought the sequel rights, and they were going to make this the sequel movie, and they gave me the right to use Roger, and that's actually not Jessica on the cover.
Oh no,
that's Jessica's twin sister, Joellen, who is identical to Jessica in every way, except she's
like this big.
She's only 6 inches high, yeah, and she has a semi-affair with Eddie Valiant, which is kind of fun to describe.
That was an interesting love scene. I'm gonna
it was actually Bob Hoskins came in and did the cover for that, did it uncredited.
Oh, that's awesome.
I wanted to be on the cover of all my books. I am on the back cover of this, in Benny the Cab with Roger watching a movie at a drive-in theater eating popcorn. But this, for the third book, Who Whacked Roger Rabbit, Disney didn't want to buy their film rights for it and wouldn't give me the rights to use the character on the cover. So we had to be creative, and you see an outline of Roger, who was, kind of collapsed into the ground, having been shot dropped from a very high altitude. And we used other characters. That's Willie Prosciutto and his girlfriend, Honey Graham. Willie is the main villain, and those characters were all designed and animated by Jock Muller, who worked on the movie and did the scene of Jessica and Roger in the warehouse hanging from the skyhook. Then when I did the fourth novel, which is Jessica Rabbit's Serious Business, I thought Jessica needed her own book because everything so far had been Roger and Eddie, and I thought Jessica needed her own book, that she should come into her own, and she should be portrayed as a kind of fully realized modern woman. And it's a tough book for a guy to write a book about somebody who is one of the premier fantasy sexual objects of the 90s and 2000s. But I wanted to portray her as a strong-willed, intelligent, can-do kind of woman who is not obligated to the men around her, and who is much smarter than the men around her and uses her wits to kind of outsmart the men who are trying to do her wrong. I wrote this book and gave it to 30 beta readers. I always give my books to beta readers to make sure I'm not going off the deep end. And I gave it to the most militant women I could find. I mean, the real feminine rights, women. And they all came back with basically the same comment. They said, Jessica Rabbit in this book is the kind of woman I've always wanted to be. The thing about this book is it's an origin story. It takes Jessica from her origins as a shop girl in a toy store. Her name is Jessica Krumsky, and it takes her. She's not terribly attractive, and she's kind of a woman who knows how to get things done, but um, she's not the Jessica Rabbit we've come to know and love. She's very plain and almost ordinary, and it takes her from there up through her recruitment by an agency called Sirius, that is a secret agency whose mission is to root out and capture master criminals. And she becomes basically a secret agent. Now, in this book, Jessica is a human being, and she's a human being through the entire book. She's never a toon. The book shows where toons come from and how Toontown came to be, how Jessica met Roger, how they fell in love, and it's an origin story. But in the book, she is never a toon. She's always a human being. So I did not want to portray her on the cover of the book the way she is in the movie, because she doesn't look like that in the book. Even showing her as a cartoon, she doesn't look like that. So I went to my book designer, the guy who does my book covers, and in the book, serious agents always wear tuxedos, no matter what they're doing. I mean, if they're working out in the gym, they're wearing a tuxedo. If they're swimming in the pool, they're wearing a tuxedo. So Jessica, as a serious agent, always wears a very high style feminine tuxedo, with pants or a skirt or whatever, but always a tuxedo. And so I told my book illustrator that I wanted to see a real woman wearing a tuxedo, maybe holding a gun like James Bond. And he just couldn't get it. He just tried and couldn't get it. And then one day, this illustration came across the transom, came to me through Facebook. And it was by a guy in Italy named Andy Prisney. And Andy said, "Hey, I drew this. It's Jessica Rabbit, and would you want to post it on your Facebook page?" And I looked at it and I said, "I'd do better than that." I said, "I'll put it on the cover of my book. It's perfect." Because it's Jessica, but it's not Jessica. It's a stylized representation of Jessica. And she does wear a red dress in the book, so it's appropriate. She's sitting on a keg of dynamite, which is definitely appropriate, and there's little rabbit ears coming out from behind the keg of dynamite. And I said, the only thing in the original, she was holding a cigarette, and Jessica does not smoke. And I said, you got to take the cigarette out. And the smoke from the cigarette was going up over her head. It was beautiful artwork. I said, take the cigarette out and we'll work with that. And so it took him like 10 minutes, and he replaced the cigarette with a glass of champagne, and the bubbles are going up over her head. It was perfect. So I said, "Hey, I want to use this on the cover of my book." And I said, "Hey, how much would you charge me?" And he said, "Oh, no, you can have it. You can have it." I said, "Oh, no, that's not the way things work." And even in my, maybe in Hollywood, but not in my world. So I paid him what I would have paid the other guy, and put his drawing on the cover of my book, which I think is a magnificent story for wannabe artists, because you just never know where your artwork is going to wind up. So right. That's why that cover looks so remarkably different from the other ones, because it's a slightly different premise. And
right. Well, I also like the cover that you wound up with, because as much as the tuxedo idea I get, people don't associate Jessica Rabbit with a tuxedo. They associate her with a red dress. And so this is a way to reference that this is that Jessica Rabbit, while still suggesting that she looks different.
Yeah, exactly. And in the book, she does come upon her red dress, although I won't get into how she does it, but she does find the red dress. And it's a great book. It got great reviews.
Well, I personally liked, I know this is from the movie, but when Eddie Valiant says, I swear, what do you see in that guy? And she goes like, he makes me laugh. And in this book, you actually see the character like, oh yeah, like there's all these like suave men that she could care less about, but the guy who makes her laugh is
Exactly
the
right.
one that
Exactly
catches
right.
her heart.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's kind of nice to finally have, even though it kind of, again, it's in its own little universe. There's things like Kindles and iPads, which did not exist in the other Roger Rabbit books, but it kind of explains that relationship and visualizes it.
Yeah. To my mind, Toontown is a flowing stream of time and place, and I always rationalize it by saying, well, the characters live in a world and they make movies, and the movies may well be period pieces. Like Clark Gable lived in the 30s and the 40s, but made a movie about the Civil War. Well, you know, Toons live in current times, but make movies about Toontown in 1946. To me, it's perfectly logical, and it doesn't bother me. Jessica Rabbit, Serious Business, is set in modern times, and they go into Toontown at the end, and everything comes from that. And I see Who Framed Roger Rabbit as being a movie that Toons in current day made as a period piece. Yeah.
Yeah, except that the movie also takes place in the 40s as well. I will comment a little joke when I read in the book that Jessica got at her Kindle and started reading. I'm like, I'm reading this book on a Nook. Because that's my sense of humor.
Well, and it's a good one. It's a good one. We could work that into a tight 10 and get you a job on a comedy show.
Yeah, because I'm more of a I'm more of a Nook person for two reasons. One, I like how when on the Nooks, like the pages actually turn, whereas on the Kindle the pages slide.
Yeah.
But secondly, I really don't like giving money to Amazon unless I have to. I would much rather give it to the bookstore than.
I'm with you 100%. Or the author. You just send it directly to the author. You know, if you notice, let me point out one other thing. Over on the side there, it says now in audio.
Yes,
all of the Roger Rabbit books are in audio, so you don't even have to read them anymore. You can listen to them. And I can't tell you how much time that saves me, because before they came out in audio, people used to just call me up and I would read them the book over the telephone. So it just saves me terrific amount of time, you know?
Yeah, it would. Although I will continue to read the books, if only because, like, except for things like memoirs and history books, I don't like audiobooks very much, especially when you have one author trying to make different sounds of the characters and stuff. It's like, if Stephen Fry couldn't pull it off for the Harry Potter audiobooks, so I just prefer actually reading the books. Now I have actually I'll share a fun story. I have actually bought several books from you directly, that were signed and everything. One of the things that I do every year is I do a White Elephant book exchange every Christmas, where it's like the White Elephant game, except it's nothing but books. Now, there's a few rules in the books. One, please don't make it a gag gift. We want the book to be something someone wants to read, and no religious books, no political books. I actually put as my book one year, Who Censored Roger Rabbit, one of the old paperback books.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now, frustratingly, it was picked last. But the person opened it, and it's like, Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Is this based on the movie? Like, no, the movie's based off of that. That's the book the movie is based off. And everyone's like, oh, because several people would have stolen that book had it been opened sooner. And then the guy was like, well, I'm glad no one can steal this now, because I'm the last one.
Kind of the story of my life, last one chosen. It was like that when I was playing softball, basketball, and now as an author. I mean, my life hasn't changed.
Well, I still haven't been published as an author yet, so you're ahead of me. I've just been in the newspaper a couple times. but I figured that you'd appreciate that story, knowing that.
It's a good story.
Yeah, and then actually the following year, someone actually said, "So, is there another Roger Rabbit book in there?" And I said, "Well, if there is, I didn't buy it. So I'm not going to buy the same book over and over."
Oh,
again.
You should. They make you should buy in bulk.
that would, yeah. Well, then people would know what, It's like it makes the game interesting. But I might sneak another Roger Rabbit book in there in the future.
I will give you a little hint. I can't talk about this because there are some things going on, but there's some forthcoming news that will make Roger and especially Jessica fans very, very happy. Should be an announcement forthcoming imminently, and should make your book buying for next Christmas a lot easier.
Okay, well that would be good to know. I'm gonna sense it's not a movie because those have been like I that's definitely above your pay grade, but that movie has had so many false starts and stops.
All I can say to that is stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Stay
all
tuned.
right. I am looking forward to that announcement. It was nice to see Roger Rabbit in the Chip and Dale movie.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of nice, especially since he's really no longer in the theme parks or anything like that. I mean, man, Roger Rabbit was like going to be like Disney's next best thing, and then Michael Eisner had to put one of the shorts in front of Dick Tracy instead of one of Spielberg's film, and it started a domino effect of rich men getting in a pissing contest.
Mm.
And I'm sure you were sitting from the sidelines just kind of watching all that going like, come on, guys.
Let's all play nice, get together. But yeah.
It kind of feels like the Amazon dispute with the Broccolis, where until they bought them out, it was kind of like, guys, as long as you're doing this pissing contest thing, you realize James Bond movies aren't getting made, right? Why don't you just? So here's I think going to be a good question to kind of more or less end with. So you have all these books. Aside from the Roger Rabbit books, which my viewers are probably going to buy anyway, and by the way, folks, if you buy the physical book straight from Gary K. Wolfe, obviously it supports the authors. If you don't have a lot of money, most of these books are very affordable on Kindle and Nook. But if you had to pick one non-Roger Rabbit book that you would want people to check out, which one would it be?
Killer Bull, of course.
Okay.
Killer Bull is a great book. And if you're really into science fiction, Space Vulture.
Space Vulture.
Yeah, that's the one. I wrote Space Vulture with my boyhood friend. We grew up together in a small town called Earlville, Illinois. And his name was John Myers. And he introduced me to science fiction in like the 7th or 8th grade. He showed me a book that he had found in the local library, and it was called Space Hawk. And he says, you got to read this. He says, it's science, but it's fiction. He says, it's science fiction. Said, wow, we never heard of that. So I read it, and I loved it. He loved it. And we could quote verbatim passages from Space Vulture and still can. And that got us turned on to, we went to the town librarian. I said, can you get us more of this science fiction? And she said, oh, yeah, absolutely. So she got us the Towering Giants, Heinlein, Asimov, Bradbury, and we read them and we loved them all. So 20, 25 years down the road, we were still talking about Space Vulture and still quoting to each other passages from Space Vulture. And I decided I was going to find, a Space Hawk. And I decided I was going to find 2 copies of Space Hawk, one for John and one for me. And we were going to reread it and relive our youth. So I did that. And it was the worst goddamn book you've ever read in your life. I mean, it was horrible. Oh my God. It was, the story was trite and ridiculous. The lead character was a cardboard Yahoo. It was racist. There was just nothing good about it. And I called John and I said, "Did you read Space Hawk?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "What'd you think?" He says, "It wasn't very good." I said, "Yeah, it wasn't very good." So one of us, and we still argue about which one suggested it. So it's a pity we can't rewrite it the way we remember it instead of the way it really was. But we decided we were going to do that. And I bought the rights to Space Hawk so there wouldn't be a problem. And we were just going to rewrite it, make it more modern, make it less racist, but you couldn't. There was just nothing good about it. So we had to start from scratch, and we created a novel of our own. We did use some of the Space Hawk characters just as homages. Hawk Karst, the lead character, and a couple others. And some of the passages that we remembered, Hawk pointed his laser pistol, pulled the trigger, and the air was filled with the smell of burning flesh. I mean, how could you not? So we wrote this together, called it Space Vulture, which is one better than Space Hawk. And Tor brought it out, and it was a sensation, especially with the guys of our age who had read pulp science fiction novels, and they were writing us fan letters saying, "I never thought I would see one of these pulp science fiction novels ever again." And they gave it to their kids, and we started getting letters from their kids. And the New York Times printed an article in which they listed what they considered to be the 10 best pulp science fiction novels of all time. And I mean, there was Asimov on there, and Bradbury, and us. I mean, we were one of the top 10 pulp science fiction novels. So yeah, so I would go with that one.
Okay, I haven't read it, so I'll probably buy the ebook.
You'll like it a lot.
How much is the? Yeah, see, folks, very, very affordable. If you've not read like the Roger Rabbit books and stuff like that, it's definitely. This one does not have a physical copy. It looks like, so this one you have to buy.
It should, but maybe it doesn't.
Well, there's no link. There's no link there. Although they do have the Vulture's website. I wonder if
see if it's on there. Huh.
Share this tab. Let's see here. You can buy. Let's see what's going on for Barnes and Noble. So, and it brings me to the homepage. So they need to fix those links actually. So
I'll take a look. There should be a physical copy of it, but most people now buy Kindle anyway. So
yeah, for the most part, I buy digital books except for personal favorites because, admittingly, most books have like a horrible resale value, and they just take up so much space anyway. So it's like, I don't mind. But then you have like, I'll keep my Lord of the Rings, my Harry Potters, my Steve Jobs biography, the Roger Rabbit books. I'll keep those in physical copies because I just don't ever want to lose them. But there's pros and cons to both. Probably the biggest pro with ebooks is that you can like bring them, instead of bringing a bunch of books on a plane, now you just bring the Kindle or the Nook on the plane, and you have all of them.
Your whole library in your backpack. Yeah.
Yep. Well, anyways, so thank you for sharing all that. Those were some very interesting stories. Makes me want to go. Maybe I'll reread Who Censored Roger Rabbit again, and for some people, they might want to rewatch Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And if any of you have not read the Jessica Rabbit book, I did read this book. It is very enjoyable. I do highly recommend it. So check that out. For everyone else, if you are listening to this podcast where there are comments that are being left, we would like to know, what are your favorite Gary K. Wolf books? Have you read the Roger Rabbit books? What do you think about them? Let us know. And if this is your first time here, hey, let's make it official. We're on Spotify, Apple, Deezer, and all the podcasting apps of your choice. You can find Gary K. Wolf at his personal website, GaryKWolf.com. Are you working on the book?
GaryWolf.com.
Oh, sorry, GaryWolf.com.
Yeah. Somebody else took the K, so it's just GaryWolf.com.
Okay, where you can buy all of his books, his audio books. Are you working on another book right now that we could
I
be
am.
looking?
I'm working on a couple. I have a series of hard-boiled private eye novels. I mean, I've written about a hard-boiled private eye and Eddie Valiant, but I've never written about a straight private eye novel. So I'm writing a straight private eye novel and the sequel. I'm doing the first one is done. I'm working on the sequel now, and I'm also working on another Roger, Eddie, Jessica book, which introduces a whole new category of toon, which I can't talk about because I'm superstitious. And
Right.
and I'm also afraid that Hollywood will steal my idea before I can get it out.
Yeah, no, you
Yeah,
can't trust too many people in Hollywood. so so all right. I'm personally looking forward to those books, and thank you for joining us. And everyone, make sure to check out his books as well as subscribe to the podcast. And as always, I'll see you at the movies. Take care, everyone.